A lecture about GM foods.
Okay, everyone. Today we're going to talk about genetically modified foods, GM foods for short. These are foods made from animals or plants that have modified genes. Nowadays, scientists can modify the genes of, well, pretty much any animal or plant to make it grow faster, grow bigger, or, in the case of a plant, to produce its own pesticides. One way genetic engineers do these things is by taking a gene from one animal or plant and inserting it into another kind of animal or plant, which makes for some pretty weird combinations. For example, they can insert a rat gene into lettuce to make it produce vitamin C, or insert moth genes into apple plants to give them resistance to diseases. Some GM plants even produce chemicals that fight the insects that attack them. It would be a real plus if insects could no longer destroy any crops, wouldn't it? Many scientists are optimistic about the technology and feel that GM foods could be the key to some significant advances in agriculture and health. Okay, first, let's talk about the concerns people have about GM foods. Critics fear that these new foods are being rushed to market before their effects are fully understood. For example, many experts are concerned about superweeds. They think certain weeds near GM crops could pick up some of their modified genes. Since the crops have a resistance to weed killers, the weeds could develop resistance to weed killers too. Some scientists also worry about the detrimental effects of GM plants on insects and animals. For example, corn plants have been genetically modified to create pesticides that kill the insect pests of corn. But what happens when wild animals eat the corn? Can we guarantee that they won't be affected? Although researchers haven't been able to demonstrate that GM crops are detrimental to human health or to the environment, some critics are concerned about what they call gene flow. Gene flow is the movement of genes via flowers and seeds from one population of plants to another. Some scientists feel that mixing GM plants with conventional ones could have a long-term impact on gene flow. And some skeptics warn that insects will gradually become accustomed to GM crops that were designed to have a resistance to them. The result could be superpests that farmers would have no defense against. So, in North America and Europe, the value and impact of GM foods have become the subject of intense debate, which makes sense because many GM foods are already being served in restaurants there. But most people don't even realize that they've been eating genetically modified foods for quite some time. For instance, did you know that in the United States, genetically modified vegetables have been sold since the mid-1990s? Today, roughly 75% of all processed foods on U.S. supermarket shelves contain ingredients from GM soybeans, corn, or canola. This includes pizza, ice cream, salad dressing, and baking powder. And the U.S. is certainly not alone. Argentina, Canada, China, South Africa, Australia, Germany, and Spain all plant plenty of genetically modified vegetable crops. Scientists are also working on various GM animals, but official approval has been very hard to get. One animal that was approved was a fast-growing type of GM salmon. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration declared that the fish was safe to eat back in 2010, but large supermarket chains felt their customers wouldn't be interested, and so they didn't sell it. However, journalists who follow scientific innovations believe it's very likely that GM animal products will be selling in supermarkets within the next 5 years. If you're concerned about this trend of GM foods being publicly sold, you're not alone. One way corporations are responding to these concerns is by doing thorough testing, more than they do on any other type of food we eat, to offset any risks of GM foods. In addition, government agencies are involved in monitoring the production and sale of GM foods. In fact, in 2016, the U.S. government passed a law requiring companies to label foods to let customers know if they contain GM ingredients, or to at least let them know how they can obtain that information. So, there's no question that people are worried about GM foods, and companies are taking steps to meet their concerns. While I've talked about the drawbacks of GM foods, I must mention that GM foods also have great potential to help feed the world. Let me give you an example. Golden rice is a new type of rice that has been genetically modified to produce beta carotene, a substance our bodies need in order to produce vitamin A. White rice, which, as you know, is an important food in many cultures, doesn't provide any beta carotene. Sadly, according to the World Health Organization, between 100 million and 140 million children in the world suffer from a lack of vitamin A. The genes of golden rice plants have been modified so that they create beta carotene. Skeptics say that we won't solve the world's vitamin A problem by means of golden rice alone, and that it remains to be seen whether it will actually improve vitamin A levels in the population. Still, it could prove invaluable to the well-being of millions of children, so isn't it worth a try? Some critics aren't comfortable with the fact that big companies control genetic modification. These critics say the companies aren't devoting enough resources to developing seed technology to make seeds available to poor farmers at low cost. But those who advocate genetic modification tell us that it can increase the amount of food we're able to produce, that it offers crop varieties with resistance to pests and disease, and that it provides ways to cultivate crops on low-quality farmland where other crops couldn't grow. And genetically modified seeds are easy for farmers to use because the technology is built into them. Farmers just need to plant them, and they're pretty much guaranteed to grow. With so many advantages, I think GM foods are only going to become more important in the future.